Wales as the players return to domestic duty for the weekend. However, there is a massive international hangover for some of those Brazilian players that weren't released by their clubs, because Brazil have made an official complaint to FIFA that Alisson, Fabinho, Firmino, Ederson, Gabriel Jesus, Fregi, Thiago Silva and Rafinha were not released for this World Cup qualifying schedule because, of course, the concerns of the pandemic. I want to welcome in Gab Marcotti. Gab, am I right in thinking now, because they didn't release these players, it means that they won't be eligible for their respective clubs this weekend?
Well, it depends on what the FIFA rule is, but based on the letter of the law, if you have an international player, you have to release them during the international break. If your government, which is a completely separate body, obviously, from football, has a rule, as they do in this case, that if he travels to certain so-called red list countries, in the case of the United Kingdom, that player then needs to quarantine in a hotel for 10 days, that's your problem. But you have to release the player if the player wants to come, obviously. And obviously, not all these players came, and that's not always the case. And of course, we saw others, like the Argentine players, did leave. So that's what the rule says. And the rule stems, incidentally, it's not down to an agreement between FIFA and the leagues. It's down to an agreement between FIFA and the ECA, the European Clubs Association. They signed this agreement years ago, which basically said you must release the players during the international break. If you don't, then there are penalties. One of them is this 5-day ban that's being talked about. And in exchange, the national teams, the players have 24 hours to return to their club sides after being released from international duty, or 48 hours if it's intercontinental.
This is absolutely ridiculous, isn't it, Gab? In the middle of a pandemic, that people want to exercise these sort of punishments. The teams are only looking after their property that, by the way, they spend millions and millions of pounds on every single week in wages. Why on earth would you want to put them to South America in the middle of this pandemic? Where is the common sense in any of this?
Well, Dan, you just said the teams are looking after their property. You've got a couple former professional footballers with you in the studio. I don't know if they ever felt like they were actual property, like their cattle or like a television that the club might own. This is the deal that clubs made with internationals, because equally there's a lot of players who want to play for their country. And you can pull out the in the middle of a pandemic line, but then just as easily, you could also point out that there are a whole number of professions which are exempt from quarantining on their return to the United Kingdom, and that just 2 months ago, less than that, the United Kingdom's government was willing to go and grant all sorts of exemptions to people and from red list countries, including, by the way, Brazil, telling them, yeah, you can come in, we'll give you a sporting exemption. Turkey were on the red list. They would have had an exemption if they'd gone to the UK. So I think what Brazil are saying is, well, hang on a minute. You could do this 2 months ago when the situation was objectively worse than it is now, but now you're going to hold us to account based on some arbitrary red list. And I'm sorry, this is your government's fault, but you player, it's up to you sort it out between yourselves, clubs, and your government, not with FIFA. You have to release the player. So that's what they're going to argue. Obviously, the clubs are going to see it differently. They're working to find a solution. I have a hunch that they are going to reach a solution, and it's probably going to be something all-encompassing that's going to cover the October and November breaks. Because remember, this is going to happen again in a couple weeks when the October break rolls around, and I suspect it might be something like enhanced COVID protocols, maybe sporting exemptions for those breaks, something like that, to avoid in exchange for not banning those players now.
Yeah, they're going to have to drop something in the paperwork here, aren't they? They're going to have to rewrite the legal document, because, as Gab has pointed out, I mean, this rule was partly put in place to stop the shenanigans of him and Aage and before.
Don't quote me in that. I used to go home every single time.
Stevie Nicol is the embodiment of this, isn't he?
Right. It was the era before me, which was 10 years, which was nickel. That was the era where the big clubs, particularly in England, said to the Scottish players or the British players, a couple of big games coming up, don't think you should be going. And they used to just pull out willy-nilly and people could do nothing about it. They changed all that so that the countries were able to call in the players and check those players personally and decide if the players were injured or available. I can understand where the Brazilians are coming from here, but ultimately there is an unforeseen circumstance, which has been the global pandemic. So they're going to have to put in some legal text in the document so that if they do fudge it this time, come those fixtures that Gab mentioned, we're not having this same scenario in a couple of months.
That's the thing. The only people who benefit out of this are the lawyers, because from an English club's perspective, if they are found guilty of keeping their players back, you get a 5-day suspension. But if they travel to Brazil and come back, you have to quarantine for 10 days. As Gab rightly points out, when you travel to red zone countries and you come back in, the countries are supposed to release their players 24, 48 hours following that game. But when you're quarantining, are you releasing the players out of your own responsibility?
What a mess.
Only the lawyers.
Is there any chance we can just move on?
Only the lawyers are licking their chops at this prospect.
God, yeah.
But Dan,
Yes,
I'm just thinking we can't discuss this without seeing the whole picture of the power battle between the leagues, FIFA, the players' union, the clubs, UEFA. This is a part of the whole situation. We are discussing at the moment now a World Cup every second year, and they kind of... I agree with Gab that somehow they will find a solution here, but they're just showing the muscles now. This is a power battle. I think that saying that with a quote that the players will end up as losers because they will have to play international tournaments every summer. That could maybe be happening, but I think this whole quarantine thing, Brazilian thing, and that silly scenery of Brazil against Argentina, that is all part of all this power battle. I think we would see more of this till this will be sorted out. This Super League debate started it all off, and we'll see more of that in the future.
Money. Have you had this debate, this World Cup thing every 2 years?
We did it on extra time yesterday.
Seriously, what the hell?
Yes. Let's not go off on that tangent.
Well, it's got to be better than this COVID protocol stuff.
Jurgen, as a former national team manager, how do you handle all of this?
It's very difficult, and I think, the big picture certainly is that this pandemic, has been so challenging for everybody, for the countries, for the governments, for FIFA, UEFA, CONMEBOL, CONCACAF, no matter where you are in this on this planet, in the world, there were so many problems, so many issues, and you're just running from one problem to another, and we just can hope, that this pandemic is over soon, that we have it under control, and people can travel freely again, you look at this Brazil against Argentina topic, this is insane, absolutely insane what happened there, because authorities walked on the field and called the game off after 5 minutes playing. That everything was cleared the day before in meetings between the authorities. Now the Brazil Federation comes in with another issue. So it's politics all over, it's power battles all over. The Super League started it all, as Jan said, rightfully so. As a manager of a team, the only thing you can do is to stay calm and communicate it well with your players and stay focused, and come somehow find solutions, and find ways to stay connected, and get hopefully the players released. Obviously, I understand the clubs, especially the big European clubs, with their players, when they come back now from CONMEBOL, from those games, which are, by the way, they are tomorrow, they are on Thursday, on Saturday, Sunday, games are played in Europe all over the place. They are exhausted. I mean, they're flying back 12 hours, and they're supposed to play then on Saturday in the Premier League or in Serie A or the Spanish League and so on. So all you can do as a manager, as a coach, is to communicate as much as you can with your players, to keep them going in the right direction, to make sure that they stay fit, stay healthy, and stay focused. But it is an absolute nightmare that we are going through, and it's just going on since 1.5 years since the pandemic started.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN Plus.